Injuries are so common among recreational runners, and despite your best efforts, some injuries can persist for weeks, months, and even years. To help these stubborn injuries, I've created 10 troubleshooting tips, all are designed to kickstart your rehab and get you heading in the right direction. Tip 1 is to go through the previous steps of creating this playlist and make sure you haven't missed anything. If this is the first time you're hearing about this video is actually step 8 of 10 to overcome your injuries and rethink the way you see rehab. I'll also be documenting the rehab journeys of runners just like you using these 10 principles to show you it can be done in the real world. So step 1 is to go through each of the previous steps and carefully see anything that you may have glanced over. Trust me, sometimes you can watch an instructional video and it isn't until the second or third time the information starts to click into place. I recommend to use the 10 videos in this playlist to pick out 1 or 2 key breakthroughs each time. Gain insight with this first pass, make adjustments in your rehab, and once they're set in place, go through the sequence over again and lay down another layer to increase the effectiveness. Step 2 is to make sure you have the right expectations. In other words, you can be on the right track to your recovery, but your expectations lead you to think that something is wrong. For example, for a chronic tendinopathy, research says it can take about 6 months to rehab, for some longer than 12 months. This takes me to one of the pain rules I listed in step 2, and was that you should see improvements week by week. While this is just a general rule, some exceptions can be made for chronic injuries, and noticeable improvements may need to be seen every 2 weeks or even every month. However, if you have a chronic injury and haven't seen improvements over the past month, change something in your management. Trust me, I've seen way too many people try a certain approach for 6 months without any changes in symptoms and without tweaking their rehab plan. Don't make the same mistake. Troubleshooting step number 3 is to make sure that you're progressing your rehab once you're able. Often, the most effective progression you can make is increasing the weights of the exercises. I like to hover within a rep range of 8 to 12 reps for the exercise such as calf raises or lunges, squats or deadlifts. For example, if I'm squatting 30 kilograms and doing 3 sets of 8, my next progression would be 3 sets of 12. Then I'll drop back down to 3 sets of 8 with 35 kilograms. The situation some runners find themselves in is being too nervous to progress with weight because their current exercise is not pain-free. But if you've stayed at one level of progression for a very long time, it might be worth at least testing out a progression to see if symptoms remain the same. Let's use Cody as an example. Let's say his half squats cause 2 out of 10 pain when lifting 30 kilograms. This makes him nervous to progress. But when he does progress, he finds 35 kilograms produces the same amount of pain. In fact, several weeks later, he has progressed to 50 kilograms and has actually noticed a decrease in pain as the joints now have a higher capacity. The other thing about the exercise progression is we need the exercise to bridge the gap to meet the conditions of running. And on average, 2 to 3 times your body weight goes through your leg each step you take. So avoid the lightweight and high reps and recognize what your body needs to adapt to. Step 4 is to widen your scope and see if any other loads outside of your running and rehab are contributing to overload and irritation. Here's a list of common culprits: barefoot walking when standing still for plantar fasciitis, sitting on hard surfaces or stretching too often for proximal hamstring tendinopathy, too many stairs for knee pain, or crossing your legs or sleeping on the affected side for lateral hip pain. Dig deeper and document your symptoms day by day and try to identify any of these patterns. If you do, just like Cody with his gardening in step 5, make an effort to modify or remove the aggravating factors. Step 5 is to assess your current well-being, such as stress, sleep, and your nutrition status. In fact, there are multiple papers to show a link with psychological, non-sport stresses such as daily stress and hassles and the likelihood of you developing an injury. This link is also shown when sleep is reduced. with studies showing a 70% increase in injury rates in adolescents with less than 8 hours of sleep, and another study of 95 endurance athletes showing a significant increase in the likelihood of you developing an injury if you've averaged less than 7 hours of sleep per night over the course of 2 weeks. Even though this is looking at the likelihood of a future injury rather than the rehab of a current injury, the idea is still the same. And that's because these domains hinder your body from full recovery, which can lead to injury risk and hinder your rehab progressions. On top of that, reduced sleep, increased stress, and a diet high in sugar can all amplify pain signals. So, as an example, a 2 out of 10 during an exercise could balloon to a 5 out of 10 if the well-being domains aren't in check. Number 6 is to be completely objective about your recovery. We have the pain rules established for a reason, but a lot of runners convince themselves they're ready to progress in their running mileage and they suffer the consequences. Be objective with your recovery and don't make your decisions in the heat of the moment, which are often influenced by irrational emotion. If you are objective and not seeing an acceptable recovery trend, you may need to consider adjusting the pain rules. We do this for 2 reasons. 1, every injury is different and these generic pain rules won't suit every injury type. And 2, people interpret pain scores differently. So someone's 3 out of 10 will be different to someone else's. So you can scale back and set your new pain rules. For example, pain during exercise might be less than a 3 out of 10 rather than a 4, and return to baseline in less than 6 hours rather than 24 or 12 like we said earlier. Troubleshooting tip number 7 is to avoid the boom-bust cycle. Remember what happened to Cody that caused his flare-up in step 6? He was feeling good for a few weeks and then got ambitious and overtrained, resulting in a recovery setback. This is an obvious boom-bust cycle, but it may also happen to you on more of a subtle level. Initially, when symptomatic, an injury is often dictating your duration and the speed of your running. It's in control of the parameters. But when you start feeling better, you start to have a bit more control. And if you subtly lean into an overloaded state, you'll find a slight elevation in symptoms and you're forced to gradually pull back and revert to the injury dictating your training loads again. This subtle to and fro can occur for months without resolution, so be careful. Step 8 may be to level up your rehab team. Assess your current team and see if you need to seek another therapist or recruit additional assistance. After discussing a few of these points earlier, you may decide to enlist a strength and conditioning coach, a running coach, a dietitian, a psychologist, or even a sleep expert. We're up to step 9, and if you haven't had any revelations yet, step 9 is to book in an injury chat with me. I'll leave a link in the description, and also my calendar can be found on the YouTube banner. And finally, we have step number 10, which is accepting that pain is complex, which means in some circumstances, we may need to move away from the load versus capacity model as discussed earlier and think about pain differently. It can be so complex, in fact, that I've dedicated an entire step to explaining it, so you can go check that out now.